Hi everyone, I'm Delilah aka Assassina-san here with another video review, and this time it's for Spider-Man Miles Morales. So if you guys tuned into my other one of Astro's Playroom, thank you so much. And we're gonna be doing the same thing here. Yeah, I was really surprised when Miles Morales was announced at the PlayStation event. It was actually the PlayStation 5 reveal event that they were going to be releasing another Spider-Man game, this time with a standalone DLC kind of game with a focus on just straight up Miles Morales. At first I was surprised, but I'm like, it makes total sense. They already have the engine, they already have the foundation, they just need to build upon that and then create a story for Miles so that we can get to know him, whereas in the last game he was kind of someone we played as briefly, but not as Spider-Man, as just Miles. He did have a substantial part of the story, and that story is definitely extended to this game. But he was just a little piece of the game, and now we have this game which is dedicated to him. It's a lot shorter of an experience than the original Spider-Man. Think of it like this: Uncharted Lost Legacy, what that means to Uncharted 4, or Infamous First Light and what that is for Infamous Second Son. So it's kind of like these characters that we got to know in the original games that were brought to a whole new game, a shorter game, a more bite-sized experience, but focusing on their story. So there's like side character stories, but kind of becoming their own main characters, because the characters in these games are freaking great and we love them, and Miles is no different. Miles Morales is better than the original Spider-Man in almost every way because it's learned from Spider-Man. It looks better, it feels better, it sounds better, it has a lot more graphical updates, the swinging feels smoother, a lot of the side missions aren't as annoying. Fuck you, Screwball, nobody wants your damn bomb missions. Nobody cares about your followers. We're all about Danica now, which isn't part of a mission. She did give side missions, but they're not annoying. They're just integrative into the world building of New York City. Anyway, it makes a lot of sense that they were able to push this out so fast because they already had a foundation in place. What made this game extremely special to me is that I'm a Latina from New York City. I went to grad school in Harlem. I am an advocate of wanting more Black and brown people to be main protagonists in video games. I'm definitely an advocate for the Black Lives Matter movement, and I love Christmas. All of those things came together in this game. Now, before you tune out of this video and you're like, oh my god, this SJW bitch, which there's nothing wrong with being a social justice warrior. Like, there's a lot of social issues in this world, but I'm not gonna go into that because that's not the point of this video. But like, I am a professional social worker, so there is an element of social justice to that means a lot to me, especially in video games, since that's one of my biggest passions. The game doesn't focus on just that. Like, some people might say they could have focused more on that. These are issues actually happening in the world. They're actually happening in New York. Like, fuck it, go for it. And I would have been fine with that, but I think because this is such a lighthearted story, this is Miles' story and his relationship to Harlem and New York City and him becoming Spider-Man, especially Harlem Spider-Man. I think Insomniac wanted to focus on that and not so much like the heavier things that are going on in today's world, but they also didn't want to ignore it. So they did have like a nice Black Lives Matter mural that you ran into either optionally or if you did a specific side mission, to see Miles as someone that has a Black father and a Spanish mother, and that's his identity, and he very much so embraces the culture of like hip-hop in New York City. He wears Timbs, he has a fur jacket, he listens to hip-hop music, he mixes hip-hop music, you know, he's helping all of the, you know, people that are like running businesses in Harlem. He's all about the people. He volunteers at a shelter. Him and the game represent so much culture in New York City that it really tugs at my heartstrings for those reasons. Seeing Puerto Rican flags all over the place and Christmas decorations, it made me all really happy. And then when he goes home to celebrate Christmas with his mom and Genki and Finn, there's decorations all over the place, and then she's cooking food that's like authentic Spanish food that a Latinx family would cook during the holidays, like pasteles and tostones and empanadillas and pernil, and I'm getting hungry. And they all look so good. Like, I legit got hungry. Arroz con gandules, like everything. They had everything. And, you know, they were talking in their native tongue, and then you hear people in the background speaking Spanish. And even while Miles is fighting, he's like, oh, siesta, or like, oh, eso me gusta. And so I know my Spanish is really bad. Don't make fun of me. I love it. I love it. There was so much culture in the game. There was so much love and attention to Harlem, and Miles was honestly just a gem. I freaking love him. I might like him more than Peter, and I think part of that is because he's like becoming Spider-Man, and this is more of an origin stories for Miles. Peter's already an established Spider-Man in this Spider-Man PlayStation universe, whereas in most comic books and like most movies and shows that have come out, like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Spider-Man Homecoming or something like that, it's more of a like Spider-Man origin story. Here Peter Parker is very much so like he's already been there, done that, and he's that now teaching Miles how to be Spider-Man, and I think that's really cool. All that to say, I think the setting and the time of year, you know, Christmas in New York is super pretty. Taking place in Harlem, which is a place that I went to school in and a place that I know a significant amount about. Seeing Miles as a Black Latino main protagonist just made me really happy. Shifting over to combat and story and things like that, what I will say is Miles Morales is literally a remix of the original Spider-Man PlayStation game. It basically has all the DNA from the Spider-Man game and like remixes it to feel the vibes of Miles Morales. And so even the intro music, when the Marvel screen pops up and when you're traversing around New York City and when you're in combat, is Spider-Man's music were remixed with hip-hop, which makes total sense for Miles and makes total sense for Harlem and makes total sense for New York City and the vibes that we're going for. I found myself bopping my head over and over again while like fighting the freaking Raft goons or fighting the Roxxon soldiers, or, you know, the underground teenagers, neon purple teenagers or whatever. And I just had a lot of fun. Like, I really like that. I like hip hop music, but also like the remixing of the music we've already heard in the original Spider-Man game to have a more of a urban flair to it was really dope. I also saw that kind of remixing in how Miles traverses. So he's a lot more agile than Peter. His traversing seems a lot more stylized, in my opinion. He moves faster, and he also has different suits. He has suits with Timbs, he has suits with hoodies, he has suits where he has a bodega cat in his backpack. Like, I don't want to spoil all of them for you, but it's super New York City, and even his gear is super New York City. And he takes a train to fast travel, and let me tell you, fast traveling really freaking fast. Like, you'll be there in a second. You have the option to put on the train sequence if you want to see it, but other than that, you won't see it, and it'll be like in and out, and it really feels like fast traveling. Finally, thank you, how convenient. Miles also has, besides like having different suits and having different music and different ways of traversing, he also has different abilities. So he has the Venom abilities, which is just bioelectric powers, and he has like a Venom dash and a Venom strike. He has a Venom punch and a Venom smash and Venom everything, and he feels a lot stronger than Peter in this sense because he's able to take out brutes without any issues, unless of course they have a shield, but then you could still just web it and take it away from them. Whereas Peter, like, you had to be a lot more crafty with the gadgets. Miles doesn't have as many gadgets. He has like maybe 4. He has holograms that he can summon to fight by your side. He has a gravity well to like loop in enemies together, maybe do a nice Venom punch afterwards. He has these remote mines that he can place to like electrocute enemies that are lured towards it. And he has, of course, the web shooters. Not that many, whereas Peter Parker had a bunch of gadgets. So he has less gadgets, but his Venom abilities make him feel very different in combat. He feels a little stronger because he's able to do like a nice electric punch. And those abilities also carried on over into the gameplay. A lot of the puzzles were just like power up this generator, power down this electric source, etc, etc. Nothing too sophisticated there, but still really fun. I really liked his Venom abilities. I thought they were overpowered sometimes, but it's not like you can just spam the shit out of them. You do have to build a meter by like punching and kicking and webbing and things like that. It's not like that's all you use. He still feels very much so like Spider-Man. And then he also has a camouflage ability, which makes stealthing around way easier than ever. Like, It's so easy now. So in a lot of ways, Miles feels stronger and easier to use than Peter, which is interesting because he's actually newer at what he does. But he just has different abilities, and it makes it feel like still a Spider-Man game. It feels so much like a Spider-Man game, but it feels very much so like a Miles Morales game, and I think that's really good. Now, in terms of the story, this is the part that I don't feel like was the best, but I did like it still. Insomniac did a really good job of taking the magic from this really good animated movie that I highly recommend called Into the Spider-Verse, and taking the magic of the original Spider-Man game and mashing it together to create its own unique experience in Miles Morales. Miles never really had any villains that were like big bads like Peter Parker does, like, you know, Kingpin or the Sinister Six. He has more low-key villains. Insomniac took some of those villains and kind of was like, how can we find a way to make these villains feel more substantial to Miles' story? And I think they did a really good job with that, and I won't spoil anything, don't worry about it. A spoiler cast will be up with Dead Cell Media, so stay tuned for that. The antagonists in this game definitely had more motivations that were understandable. You felt a little more empathy for them. I felt like I really liked what they did with the villains, although there were one or two in particular that I felt like they could have done more with, and that tonally felt confusing. Like there were certain behavioral changes that I was just like, I don't know, it doesn't feel right. I feel like this is just plot driven instead of actually being character driven. That bothered me a little bit, but it wasn't bad. It was just something that I feel like could have had a little more thought put into it. I don't want to say too much more on that, but I really loved Genki. I really love Rio, his mother. I really love some of the NPCs that we met, that we did side quests for, like Haley. She was just super cute. Genki was one of my favorites next to Rio. He was like the Yuri in this game. He didn't just feel like someone helping Miles navigate. He felt like a best friend. He felt like family. And he also felt like someone that really had his own focuses, like he's focusing on making a game, which I thought was really cool. And he's a nerd with like Miles, and of course Miles is the best. He's just so nice, sometimes too nice for his own good. He's for the people, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, OD friendly. He's funny, like in the middle of battle he'll say some like quippy little remarks that I didn't expect, but that genuinely made me chuckle. He seems really innocent, he seems really family oriented, and he seems really ready to take on the role of Spider-Man. And just to see his character develop from the first Spider-Man game to this, it only makes me more excited to see how much further he's gonna develop now that he's like fully in his Spider-Man role. I think him being the Spider-Man of Harlem is really special, because there were a lot of sort of political statements made about Harlem, like how in this specific game they were considered expendable, and that's why certain projects were done within their vicinity. Like the main issue in this game is New Form, which was developed, I don't want to spoil it, but it was, you know, it was developed by Roxxon Corp and others, and it was supposed to be clean energy, but it was actually making people sick. And so that's where part of the issues come up with Miles and other people, including Roxxon Corporation. And Miles was trying to keep Harlem safe because they were being targeted in one way or another. And that's where his abuela lived. That's the apartment that he inherited with his mother because, you know, they moved there from Brooklyn. His heart is in Harlem. He's officially a resident there. He feels connected to the people there, you know, as Spider-Man and as Miles. And he became Harlem Spider-Man. And that just felt really good because I feel like in many ways, you know, certain neighborhoods with like more low income or poor people are considered expendable for whatever bullshit reason. And they touch on that topic a little bit, and I thought it was done really well without that being the only focus. I felt like they did very much so focus on Miles and his integration into the Harlem community between him and his family, and there was a lot of culture with his like Puerto Rican roots and things like that. But my absolute favorite thing about this game, hands down, is just how New York City manages to feel so different and refreshing despite just exploring that in 2018 when the original Spider-Man PlayStation 4 game came out. The first element of it is they focus a lot on Harlem. So Harlem was given so much love in this game, which I think was great. So it had a different vibe to it completely. besides the music and you know, the outfits and things like that. Another element to it is that it's during Christmas in New York City, which is one of the best times to be here. And so there was snow all the time, and there were wreaths and Christmas trees and lights, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. It got me in such a Christmas spirit to see all the Christmas decorations in New York City in that game, and it made me kind of really miss Christmas as it is in New York City, because I know this year is going to be a little different because a lot of places are closed down or whatever, and you know, there can't be like feasts like, you know, there were back then. It just gets me in the mood, and so seeing Christmas in New York City made exploring New York City again a refreshing experience. I didn't feel like, oh my god, I've been here, done that. It was very refreshing, and on top of that, the ray tracing, like the lighting and the reflections in this game are insane. I found myself in awe. I played in fidelity mode and I had no regrets because it's not a combat heavy game, so I didn't need to have all of the frames. I was totally fine with the fidelity mode, and I highly recommend that mode. It didn't take away from the game at all. In fact, it added to it. I feel like you're missing out if you play on performance mode because you don't get to see the reflections. And swinging around New York City and seeing how accurate those reflections are and seeing all the lighting is such a good experience. It was breathtaking. It looks so good. And like, this is New York City. Part of it is like a bunch of buildings high with a bunch of windows that have a bunch of reflections, and this game really captured that, and it also made New York City feel refreshing again, on top of the Christmas vibes that we had going on and the Harlem vibes. Overall, the music was great. I liked how they remixed it. The combat felt very different, but it still felt like Spider-Man, similar with the traversing. The story was good, but it could have been better. Some of the character developments felt a little weird, but for the most part, a lot of the characters are done really well. And the puzzles were like, okay, I mean, nothing too crazy, but you know, we're playing that game to swing around New York City and beat up a bunch of goons. This isn't a puzzle game, but the puzzles were like, okay. But I still had a lot of fun with it. I finished it on New Game Plus in 3 hours, skipping cutscenes, but my first playthrough was 8 to 10 hours, and that's doing all the side quests and things like that and taking my time with it. It's a really fun, short, bite-sized experience, but it feels very substantial, and I'm glad that they did this. And it just makes me excited to see more from Miles and more from what's to come in the next Spider-Man game. I highly recommend it. I think it's great. I super think it's great. Don't expect a long game like Spider-Man. That's not what this is. This is, like I said, like a standalone DLC. So keeping that in mind, and you won't be disappointed. Yeah, let me know what you guys think of Spider-Man Miles Morales, if there's anything I missed. Like I said, I wrote a written review with God Hates Geeks. You guys can check that out there. And looking forward to talking about more PlayStation 5 or just more games, period, with you guys. So let me know your thoughts, and thank you so much for watching. Bye.